is Big Play Detroit. I am Chris Castellani. We got Austin Sisler on the sticks producing today. And boy, oh boy, what a jam-packed show that we got today as we have, this is that rare time of year where everything kind of converges together. We have March Madness to talk about. A big reason for that is the fact that we have two literally and figuratively sweet programs in this state in terms of college basketball that are going to be playing in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, maybe even beyond. And I guess we'll start with that, though we will get into Tiger stuff and a little bit of Lions coverage as well. Mike Valenti on 97.1 made a very interesting statement over this most recent week that I think may have some truth to it, and I want to discuss it. But we are going to start with our Around the Mitten segment. And we are going to talk about Michigan and Michigan State basketball, two teams that for the second year in a row find themselves in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Obviously, goals still in front of them. Michigan last year losing in the Sweet 16 to Auburn. Michigan State losing in the Elite Eight to the same squad. And now we have both these teams that went 2-0 this weekend. I'm going to start with Michigan, who, I was very interested to see how they were going to come out in their first game against Howard, because even with them going 2-1 in, I don't really like using this word, but a relatively meaningless Big Ten tournament. They had already had the Big Ten regular season wrapped up. They had already had a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament wrapped up. Several days off. Wanted to see how they came into it after not their best weekend of basketball the weekend before. And they had a frustrating first half against Howard. And it's something that they improved upon in the second game, but I think is going to be a focus going forward, which is Michigan's, I don't know if it's inability, but I'll just say Michigan's struggles at the perimeter defensively, because we've now seen multiple instances this year, 2 of them came against Wisconsin, in which Michigan faced an opponent with lesser talent, got crazy hot from three-point range, and kept themselves in the game. Now, Michigan, to their credit, didn't panic. They scored a bunch of points. The offensive efficiency was remarkable this weekend as well. But just something to look out for, because, Howard puts up 46 on you. And I understand everyone in this tournament is tough and everyone can knock you out. But I said it in my post-game video. If a team does that again to Michigan, Michigan will find their way out of this tournament. And it concerned me. They ended up winning by 20+. They didn't quite cover, but they played a fine game, decisive victory against Howard. But it concerned me going into that second game against the 9-seeded St. Louis team, which, man, I don't know if Georgia was just tired or what, but a St. Louis team that just steamrolled the Bulldogs. A game that was never close, an 8-9 matchup that was a total blowout. So Michigan goes into that game against a St. Louis team that was hot, that had a player in Robbie Avila that scared the heck out of me, because that if there was a face and a body built for the 10 years from now, the where are they now March Madness legends, that guy stood out. And I thought Michigan played an excellent game. They hold Avila to 9 points, and he had some really good looks. Did struggle a little bit defensively at the perimeter in the early part of the game, tightened things up in the second half. Yaxel Lendeborg, one of his more aggressive games, played one of the best games that he's played, at least offensively, as a member of the Michigan Wolverines. And they pull away in another decisive win to punch their ticket to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Look, the biggest positive takeaway for Michigan after this first weekend is that, look, I don't think their offense ever really went anywhere, but the offensive efficiency was staggering. And it was from everybody. Mo Johnson was better. Mara was excellent. You had Roddy coming off the bench giving you good minutes. Trey McKinney is so good. Then, of course, you had Cadeau, who had a very good first half against St. Louis, and Lendeborg, who was excellent, especially in the second half against St. Louis as well. So, look, it's something we've seen from Michigan, and it's something I talked about as early as the Oakland game, which is the fact that this is a group that will have those nights, and we saw it mainly in the second half against St. Louis, where when they are moving the ball's on a string, and they're facilitating and they're limiting the turnovers, they are going to play just a beautiful brand of basketball, and that's exactly what they did. As of the time of this recording, we don't know who Michigan's opponent is going to be. You can thank the NCAA scheduling committee for that. Why Texas Tech and Alabama are tipping off at 9:45 is beyond me. But I would say, in terms of, do I feel better or worse after Michigan's first weekend of the NCAA tournament? Look, it's hard to say worse given the fact that they're still in it, right? But I would say in terms of the style of play, the way they played, and the typical unselfishness, as well as just some things that needed to be cleaned up, like the turnovers and the defense at the perimeter, I feel a lot better because I think that there was a bit of a stretch there where maybe they weren't playing their best basketball. But the fact is, we like to say, oh, this team's peaking at the right time in weird times of the year. if a team has a good February, we say they're peaking at the right time. No, this is when you peak at the right time. It's in this tournament. I don't care how you did in your conference tournament or at the end of the regular season. Michigan, by all accounts, seems like they're peaking at the right time. Secondly, let's jump ahead. Michigan State, a probably a less decisive weekend, but finds themselves as the 3 seed, going to Chicago, where they will be in the second weekend next weekend. They knock off North Dakota State in what was a game that isn't really worth talking about outside of saying that it was a very efficient Tom Izzo workman-like first-round effort by Michigan State. And I know that we can point to Middle Tennessee State, and that's the ultimate anomaly, but generally speaking, Tom Izzo teams as the higher seed in this tournament in the first round, they don't screw around. They don't take their opponents lightly. That was the case against North Dakota State. They rolled them. Then in that second game, a game that I felt like both teams left a lot of points on the board in the first half, Michigan State ends up pulling away, and Michigan State deserved to win that game. They ended up winning by 8. I would argue it was probably more decisive than that, just because Louisville, when you looked into their offense, is an offense that thrives off of a high volume of three-pointers, which is fine, but you got to make them. And I think Louisville 4 of maybe 19, I want to say, in the first half from the outside. Michigan State is a team with a ton of defensive length. They're a top 10 team in terms of defensive efficiency. That was the game that Michigan State wanted to play. Jeremy Fears, on a night where his jump shot was ice cold. He goes 3 for 13 from the floor, and this is almost a Steve Nash-esque performance where Jeremy Fears is just one of those guys that can change a game with less than 10 points. He breaks Michigan State's all-time record for assists in an NCAA tournament game with 16. You look at the names on that list, and you're talking about Cassius Winston, Magic Johnson, Kalen Lucas, Denzel Valentine. These are some elite playmakers and point guards at Michigan State. Last point I want to make about MSU as they march into the second weekend here is there's one player on Michigan State's team that I don't dislike by any means, but I have found somewhat frustrating throughout this season and even going into last season, which is Cohen Carr. Because I felt like Cohen Carr, explosive player, like it's undeniable. The guy has a hour-long compilation of dunks in his college career already, but I felt like he's a guy who's had a tendency to be relatively passive on the offensive end, to go away at points, and even still to this day, is not somebody that's necessarily developed a consistent jump shot. Might sound like I'm ripping him, but I'm actually not. I want to say I thought Cohen Carr played the best game of his career on Saturday against Louisville. He scores 21 points. He was efficient from the floor, but more so he was active. He was active on both sides, and I think that he has fallen into this problem in the past where if it's not an alley-oop, if it's not something going right towards the basket, he has a tendency to stand around a little bit, and defenses are willing to give him that outside shot just because he's not a great three-point shooter. I thought he was aggressive going towards the basket. He was in control. Michigan State does not win that game without his contributions. And look, they find themselves back in the Sweet 16. And I think that this is a little bit sweeter for Izzo just in the sense that there was a bit of a time where this stopped being an expectation and people worried about it. And I'm going to say this every single time about both programs in the state because it's crazy. This is the 5th time since 2013 that both of these programs have found themselves in the Sweet 16 or better in the same tournament. It had never happened prior to 2013. That just shows the consistency that both these programs have built and the longevity with Michigan. We're talking across multiple coaches now that they've been able to build. Austin, I know you're a Spartan fan. I want to give you some room to kind of add to this. Is there anything I'm leaving out about Michigan State's performance that you feel like I missed as they go into what will be their next game? And like I said, at the time of this recording, we're not sure of the opponent.
Yeah, I really loved what I saw from Michigan State this past weekend. As you said with that first game, just very workmanlike performance. They looked like a well-oiled machine. They were playing for the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back of the jersey. And there isn't a whole lot that you can often take away from those types of games when you're a high seed playing a low seed. Sometimes there is, but that's really all you're kind of looking for in a game like that. That second game, I was kind of afraid at times because Michigan State was letting Louisville hang around in that game. But I came away from that pretty optimistic about where this team can go. I don't think they're as talented or as deep as a team like Michigan or even Duke or Arizona. But before this tournament started, I was thinking, Sweet 16 is where they have to get. If they're able to claw their way into an Elite Eight or something like that, that's kind of extra, and that would be really cool if they could do that. But I saw some things in this game, despite, the sloppiness and the turnovers and Jeremy Fears, who's going ice cold from the floor, that really made me think, you know what, maybe they can make an Elite Eight, maybe they can even find themselves in a Final Four, which is, as you mentioned, Jeremy Fears, despite the fact that, he couldn't buy a bucket, had an all-time performance in terms of passing. Passing guys like Magic Johnson, Denzel Valentine, Cassius Winston for the most all-time assists in a tournament game for a Michigan State player, most all-time for a Big Ten player in the tournament, and I think it's tied for third all-time. And it was just it was tremendous that he was able to find a way to be effective and give Michigan State the win. As you mentioned, Cohen Carr, just the same. I've been frustrated with him at times as well as a Michigan State fan, but I feel like a lot of Michigan State fans or people kind of expected him to be someone kind of like a Yaxel Lendabor just because he's so athletic, and that was never entirely the case. Those weren't the expectations that I had for him. But he has slowly developed a jump shot, and, in a game like this where Jeremy Fears, even though he's finding ways to be effective, isn't scoring, for him to step up the way that he did and have literally the best game of his entire career, 21 points, I believe, first career double-double, 2 blocks. He had 1 block on a drive that was insanely impressive, found a way to come down with the ball and then pass it up ahead. He's finding a way to be an impact player, not just energizing this team, from all of these incredible dunks, but finding other ways to get involved now. And if he continues to ascend, that drastically raises the ceiling for what this team can do. And the last point I want to make about that is, I made some comments on our last show about how, I really like some of these guys, but for the most part, you're kind of relying on your starting 5 guys like Jeremy Fears or Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper. But I saw some stuff from some of the guys on the bench that was pretty impressive to me. Trey Fort found himself in the game, wound up scoring 12 points, being very effective. Cam Ward brought himself under control. He's had some issues in the past with getting in foul trouble and just being kind of reckless a little bit. He was effective as well, and so if this bench gets like 1 to 2 to 3 guys deeper, and you have guys like Cohen Carr who are playing their best basketball in, the most important time for you to do that, I think, Michigan State can potentially find themselves in an Elite Eight, maybe even make it to the Final Four. So, I really liked what I saw, even though there were times in that Louisville game where, I was a little bit nervous.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it speaks to just an issue that Michigan State has as a unit, which is that this offense is going to go relatively quiet. I don't know at this point in the season if they have a unit that's capable of running a team out of the gym by 15 to 20 points, unless they just have an anomaly type night from the outside. So we're going to have more to discuss, and we will continue to talk about college basketball, but we'll be back in segment number 2 as we continue with our Around the Mitten segment, this time talking about a quote that a radio host in Detroit had regarding the current Detroit Lions tenure. We will be right back. All right, we are back at segment number 2, and I wanted to talk about this. And look, I understand that Mike Valenti, very popular, also at points, very polarizing figure in this state. And I don't generally like to do this either unless I'm called out personally. I don't really like to pick apart someone's opinions on another show. This is not necessarily an opinion. This is a quote that was shared by Mike Valenti on his show on 97.1. And the Crunch Time guys picked it up, and a few other local affiliates picked it up. And it's something that I wanted to discuss because it's the first time in terms of chemistry, togetherness, whatever you want to call it, that maybe there's been something of a crack in the foundation regarding the Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell relationship and this era, which obviously started after beginning in the 2021 season. Now, this was information that was relayed to Mike Valenti, and I'm going to paraphrase the exact quote here. Let me get it up. Someone who covers the team told me that this was the first offseason that there are definite differences of opinion on roster construction between Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. That, again, comes from Mike Valenti on 97.1. I'm going to take Mike's word for it and say that somebody within the organization did tell him this. And look, this is obviously a pretty huge offseason for the Lions, and in turn next season I think is going to be massive in terms of how people feel about the future here. I view this as noteworthy. I'm not necessarily going to view it as concerning. I think that the dynamic between these two since Holmes arrived has been excellent, which it's been, hey, Brad, go out and spot talent, find talent, draft talent, trade for talent. The first thing he did when he arrived here was he cleaned house. He traded Stafford. I understand Stafford's been unbelievable in LA, but that was absolutely a move that the Lions needed to make, and it worked out for them in the long run. We've seen a pretty electric era of Lions football, regardless of the way that last year went. Campbell, I have viewed as a tremendous leader for the team, a elite culture builder, and a guy that people want to play for. My guess, and this is pure speculation on my part, if it's true that there are differences right now in this offseason between these two gentlemen, is the fact that I think you have a guy in Campbell who is very focused on the fit, on the culture, on getting the right guys and therefore his guys. And I think that we've seen over the last few weeks some maybe not surprising moves necessarily, but we've seen guys that were key pieces of this organization, right? Graham Glasnow. We've seen Taylor Decker. We've seen David Montgomery, these guys that, maybe didn't come in with Campbell, but were a part of the heart of that era and are now gone. I don't know if that's something that frustrates him necessarily, but on the flip side, I think that Brad Holmes' job from day one has been, I want to assemble the most talent, and I want to put the best roster on the field, and it's going to be up to you, Dan Campbell, to ensure that those guys fit here culturally. And I think that's maybe created a few differences. Look, and this is something I worried about the second I saw that video of them celebrating the Penei Sewell pick back in the 2021 draft, which is that it very rarely, and there's exceptions, I'm sure people can throw them at me, very rarely do these relationships end with both these gentlemen riding off into the sun. At some point, there's usually a separation, and often it's something of an ugly separation. I'm not saying that we're there yet. But the truth is, man, when everything is growing great and your team's winning, this team won 27 regular season games in 2 years. That doesn't include the 2 playoff games they won. Everything's hunky-dory. Everyone's happy. Everything's great. You're celebrating in the locker room. When your backs are against the wall and guys start, I'm not saying they're spouting off or anything, but there are probably a difference of opinion. I think that the dynamic between these two, while not in danger of getting ugly, because I think they handle themselves with, a tremendous amount of professionalism, but I think that we're running into a situation where we're starting to see the early formation of tension. Now, if they go out and win 12 games next year, tension gone. And they'll say, hey, professional relationship, working relationship. But it's interesting that someone came out and brought this up. And I think it's interesting just because we are almost over 5 calendar years into this tenure. And this is really the first time in which we've felt like maybe mom and dad have been fighting a little bit. So that's my general thoughts on the matter. I don't even view it as a negative. I'll view it as a negative if they don't have a good season next year. But, in general, what matters more is going to be the on-field performance, and I still have faith in Holmes' ability to draft and develop. Not much else to say about the signings that they made this week. But, Austin, what else do you have to add to this?
Yeah, I had sort of the same takeaway that you did. I will say I'm really not that concerned with their working relationship and just the personal relationship between Brad and Dan, just because, there's differences of opinion in how to construct this roster doesn't necessarily mean that, they're butting heads. It could be, they could be having very productive conversations about all of this. But in terms of, what they're disagreeing about, I'm sure that in terms of like the types of players that they're looking to bring in, they're still probably in lockstep about all of that, like who they're targeting in the draft, who they're targeting in free agency. I think it likely comes down to some of the guys that you mentioned, guys like David Montgomery, Taylor Decker, Alex Anzalone is another one that really kind of upset me a little bit when I saw that he signed elsewhere. I think that Brad is trying to pinch his pennies as much as possible to try and distribute that money as efficiently as he possibly can. Whereas Dan Campbell is a guy who he has so much heart. You know, he's been with some of these guys for such a long time now, and you know, he really cares about these guys that he's been coaching. And so to see guys like Anzalone and Decker and Demo and Graham Glasgow leave and go elsewhere, you know, that probably stings a little bit. There are some of these guys where I'm sure that Dan probably understands, you know, it's not necessarily the best fit anymore in terms of, you know, maybe how old they are, maybe what their contract looks like. But he probably has an argument in some cases as well. Like I just brought up, Alex Anzalone. I think he is a guy that you could argue was worth paying just a little bit extra to keep him here, because now there are some questions in the linebacker room. So ultimately, we're going to have to see how this next season looks. As you said, you know, winning solves everything. So if they wind up going out there and winning a bunch of games, I doubt they're going to be looking back and worrying about this anymore. But right now, you know, they're in the midst of the offseason, so they still have to find ways to assemble this roster and go out there and get back on top. So there might be some butting of heads, but nothing that I'm terribly concerned about. And hopefully they can find some ways to agree and find some players that they wind up liking together.
Yeah, and just to make one last point, I think the picture will be a lot clearer a month from now when the draft is complete in terms of exactly what they've been looking for, because how many of these guys do they expect to contribute right away, and how much of what they're trying to build they've done through free agency this year, because they have signed quite a few guys, and we covered it mainly on last week's show, but that's something that we will continue to monitor. In segment 3, we will discuss some very unfortunate news regarding the Detroit Pistons, who are still admittedly like the number 1 seed in the East, but there is legitimate trouble in paradise. We'll discuss that here in just a second. All right, back for segment number 3, and we're going to stick with basketball here, but unfortunately it's some sad basketball news. Cade Cunningham, all-star for the Pistons, MVP caliber season. I don't think was necessarily the favorite to win the MVP, but a guy who is having the best individual season, and this will still be the case, the best individual season that we've seen by a Detroit Piston in quite a while, was dealing with what appeared to be a back issue and was taken out of a game. And then the official report comes back, and Cade Cunningham diagnosed with, and this is one of those injuries, just sounds brutal, collapsed lung. And there is currently no timetable for his return. I know nothing about diagnosing anybody with anything. I have no medical degree. I tried to look into how long it takes people to come back from this stuff, and I saw as short as 1 week and as long as 8 weeks. And look, I understand it's a team game, and I understand the fact that the Pistons' record without Cade Cunningham this year is bizarrely pretty good. Here's my expectations for this. I think in the short term, because the culture's so good, because the coaching staff is so good with JB at the top, the Pistons will find a way to tread water and rally a little bit. That is often kind of what happens in the early part of this stuff. You know, you say, you understand the fact that everyone's got to step up a little bit. You need a little bit more from everybody. And in the short term, you're able to win a few games, and I think they'll be able to do that. The long term, especially going into the playoffs, is what scares me. And I think if Cade is not able to come back even to 90%, let alone 100%, this is a Pistons team that could maybe get by the first round. I don't know if they'd get much beyond that, because there's been a lot of great things that we've seen coming from this Pistons organization over the last few years. The change has been night and day, and the results speak for themselves. Made the playoffs last year, right now the number 1 seed in the East this year, and I've credited Trajan Langdon, I've credited JB Bickerstaff, I've credited these players. Like I said, overnight it felt like they built a roster, and they deserve credit for that. But let's not kid ourselves. The biggest reason why the Pistons have gone from, you know, the bottom of the barrel to one of the top teams in the NBA has been the fact that they finally found something that they'd been missing forever, which is a genuine, honest-to-God superstar in this league. Cade is everything to this team. He's the straw that stirs the drink. He can score, he can pass, he's a good defender. There's very few flaws in his game, and this isn't even meant to be a knock on the Pistons necessarily. This is just what happens when you lose a star player for an extended period of time in the NBA. And yeah, I understand that the Pistons have had, by definition, a wonderful season, and they're going to continue to. And I think with a fully healthy Cade, and that's the one more thing I'll add here. Even with a fully healthy Cade, I think that we were starting to see some signs of regression. I think that we were starting to see this team slip a little bit. They had that 4-game losing streak a few weeks ago. But this, while by no means the nail in the coffin, this team still is comfortably in the playoffs. I mean, Jesus, they're the 1 seed. This is insanely concerning. This is the equivalent of losing your quarterback. And I think that they can survive for a time and even probably potentially maintain that 1 seed going into the postseason. I don't see a world in which the Pistons make a serious postseason run unless Cade finds a way to come back close to fully healthy going forward. Depressing news, obviously, and the guy you feel worst for in the situation is Cade, but anything I'm missing here, Austin, is a devastating blow been dealt to the Pistons today, or over the last week.
No, I don't think you're really missing anything on this. I would just, echo just about everything you already said. A lot of fans and a lot of people who try to act like doctors when these things happen and, try to project when their players will be back and try to figure out how serious it is. All we really know right now is that he's out indefinitely and that he's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks. I tried to do some research myself. I saw, it could be as short as 2 weeks, potentially as long as 12 weeks. It can be a pretty severe injury, but generally, as bad as a collapsed lung sounds, generally it's not as bad as it sounds. I think they can find a way to tread water, for the rest of the regular season. It's a major bummer for a handful of reasons. Cade, I don't think he was the favorite to win the MVP in terms of his performance this season, but I think the 2 guys ahead of him weren't going to hit that. You have to hit like a 65-game minimum to be eligible for the MVP, and I think he was leading that. It looks like he's going to fall 4 games short if he doesn't come back in the regular season. I think right now the hope is that he's ready in time for the postseason. I think they've just about thrown out any idea that he's going to come back at any point in the regular season, which is a massive bummer because that would be the first MVP that the Pistons had, I believe, ever, if not in a long time anyways. But he's had a tremendous season. And if he can come back for the postseason, that would be huge. Who knows what the Pistons will be seeded at that point. Losing him, it changes everything because outside of the fact that he is an honest-to-God superstar, he is, I would say, the only one that they have right now. And, Dern is a wonderful player, made the All-Star team. They have some really great complementary pieces. JB Bickerstaff is a wonderful coach. But just the way that this team is built right now, it all moves through Cade. They've already secured their playoff spot, so there's no need to, worry about anything like that. But, if they lose that 1 seed, that changes the matchups. You don't know for sure that you're getting Cade back. If you do, is he 100%? If you're getting a Cade that's at like 60, 70% or something like that, what does that mean? Are you able to pull off maybe 1 series but not make, a serious playoff run? This potentially changes everything, and at least for the time of being, it does. Every Pistons fan is going to be holding out hope that we get him back for the postseason, that he's going to be ready to go. But for right now, I think everybody's kind of holding their breath.
Yeah, it's an undeniably devastating loss, and you feel bad for Pistons fans who've waited a long time for a team like this. You wish the best for Cade. The guy's tough, and he's had some injuries in the past, but yeah, not much else to say. Obviously, a brutal injury for the Detroit Pistons. So we'll be back in segment number 4. It'll be our All Say This segment. We are finally, and we, as of the time of this recording, are 4 days out from the Tigers' season opener, not home opener. That comes the next week, but the Tigers' season begins this Thursday in Petco Park against the San Diego Padres, and we are going to talk all about that. It is Chris Castellani. It is Austin Sisler. It is Big Play Detroit. We'll be right back. All right, so we have returned. It's time to talk a little baseball, and why not? We're going to be spending a lot of time on baseball over the next few months because the Tigers season is starting. I did a whole video about this on Twitter where I basically talked about the fact that I think that this has been, outside of the Kevin McGonigal story, maybe the most boring spring the Tigers have had in a long time, and I am so grateful for that. The truth is, good teams have boring springs because you're ready for the regular season and you know what your roster is going to look like. Okay, this is not 7 years ago where you have Brandon Dixon and Jordy Mercer fighting out for roster spots. This is a much different world that we're living in right now, thank God. And the Tigers find themselves as the odds-on favorite across all sports books, but especially FanDuel, as the favorite to win the American League Central, if not go further. So we have today's All Say This segment, All Say This statement. Austin, what do you got for me today?
I'll say this. I haven't been this excited for a Tiger season in a decade. So I might ramble on a little bit here, but, I wanted to give some space to really dive into the Tigers because, this is the last show we're going to do before the season starts. And, baseball growing up was always my thing. I played spring baseball. Sometimes I would play for 2 different teams in the summer. I played wood bat in the fall. I even played in some winter indoor leagues. I've built wiffle ball fields in my backyard. I would skip school to watch Tigers opening day or even Tigers playoff games and things like that. Baseball has always been my number one. I graduated high school and, stopped chasing that baseball dream and started becoming an adult in 2017, which was the first year that really the decline happened. We traded JV, we traded JD Martinez. At that point, Leland was gone, Dombrowski was gone, and the Avila era started. So I grew up, I wasn't continuing to play baseball anymore. And was kind of, just getting used to this essentially nearly a decade of sucking, and that just was not fun. So I was very grateful to grow up with these teams that had Miguel Cabrera and Justin Verlander and Prince Fielder and Maglio Ordonez. It made every summer so much fun. And that's what I was used to. That was normal to me growing up. But in this past decade or so, I just have not felt the connection to the Tigers or baseball. And a lot of that is because of the fact that, they were terrible. These last 2 seasons have been really special. But in 2024, that came out of nowhere. We were not expecting to make the playoffs at all. 2025, after Tarek Skubal won his first Cy Young, after we made the playoffs, won a playoff series, we had some expectations. And unfortunately, the Tigers stumbled down the stretch. They coughed up the division, and that was pretty unfortunate. But they didn't make any serious additions in the offseason. And so these past couple of years, I've been getting more interested in what the Tigers are doing. I mean, how could you not? But this offseason, so much has changed. And I'm so excited for this season because you go out and you sign Framber Valdez, which is the first massive signing that Scott Harris has made. And I've loved Framber Valdez even before we signed him. I thought he was one of the best pitchers in the game, one of the best lefties in the game. His off-speed stuff is absolutely nasty. So I was very excited about that. Then, not too long after that, they signed Justin Verlander and they bring him back. And we didn't get a chance to dive into that on this show. We were in between I'll Say This and before we started up this show when that happened. I know you dropped a video on it, but I've been so excited to talk about that because, going back to bringing up my childhood and all of that kind of stuff, this kind of, this is bringing me back to my childhood, bringing JV back to this team. And, he's still a good pitcher. I was watching some highlights of his from last season. He's still got some bite on his off-speed stuff. He can still throw hard, even if not in triple digits in the 7th inning and stuff like that, and so this is just, it's kind of reminding me of recently in pop culture, we've been in the era of bringing superheroes back or Star Wars actors back and things like that. And we're kind of reliving the things that we grew up with. And this is kind of the sports equivalent to that. So I'm so excited to see him back in the Old English D. And on top of that, you have potentially a budding superstar in Kevin McGonigal, who very well may make the opening day roster. If not, and they do the service time manipulation, it's going to be a very short amount of time before he's up. And I think he's going to be, I mean, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I think he's going to be one of, if not the best hitter on this team. I've been so impressed by everything he's done, climbing up through the minor leagues and in spring training and the Arizona Fall League and all of that. Hitting has always been my thing. This team that we've constructed is very focused on pitching. Tarek Skubal is the best pitcher in the world. Chris Fetter has done a phenomenal job with this staff. So this is a very pitching-focused team. Personally, what I enjoy is hitting, and while we have some superstars, guys like Riley Green, Kerry Carpenter is a great hitter. I know people throw around the term pure hitter and things like that, and we can mess around with the definition. What does that really mean and everything? But it's been a minute since we had a really, really great hitter, I feel, in this lineup, and someone that I would enjoy watching even just when they're taking balls or fouling off pitches and things like that. And Kevin McGonigal seems to me like he's going to be one of those types of hitters. I don't think we've ever had a hitting prospect that equals him. So maybe I'm just too excited for this season, getting ahead of myself with him, but I'm very excited to see him as well. So all that considered, all the guys that we're bringing back, we at least have Tarek Skubal for one more season. If he winds up walking, in the next offseason, signing elsewhere, that's going to be devastating. But to be honest, I'm not even really thinking about that right now because I'm just so amped for this upcoming season.
Look, I pretty much agree with most of the points you made, and I think the biggest reason, first of all, the answer is yes, this is the most excited that we've been for a Tigers season in a decade. Now, you could argue that's sort of slim pickings. I alluded to the Gardenhire era and the Avila era not being so fruitful, but the biggest thing to me, because you bring up McGonigal, and I'm super excited for McGonigal. You bring up Green and, re-signing Verlander. That stuff is excellent, but a lot of that is stuff that we as diehard fans focus on. I think that the biggest difference between this season and even last season, which was a year in which they were coming off of a playoff appearance and still had the best pitcher in baseball, the biggest difference right now is the idea of commitment, because us fans, we care so much and we want this team to be successful and we want them to spend money and we want to know that they are maximizing the opportunities they have with some of their talented players. In this particular case, obviously Skubal, who has 1 year left on his contract before he becomes a free agent. And this is the first time where we felt like they've actually made that commitment. Since the Dombrowski era. This isn't, let's give Javi and Erod some opt-out deals. Let's give, let's throw a 1 year contract to this guy or this guy. No, it is a team that, look, you take the Skubal arbitration into account, top 10 payroll in baseball. This is what you need. You don't need to be the Dodgers to win in this game. You do need to spend. And maybe not to the extent that they do, but you had two teams in the World Series last year that were top 5 payrolls. That's not a coincidence. I think that commitment shows that the Tigers have finally started to throw their hat in the ring, and it makes for what should be a really exciting season of Tiger baseball. You brought up Framber Valdez. We will talk about him in the final segment of the show and the gambling segment, sponsored by FanDuel. We'll bring that up in a little bit. But we will be back with our 5th segment here as we will discuss Tom Izzo. Tom Izzo marching on once again into, is this his, 17th Sweet 16, maybe 16th? My goodness. And we'll talk about his legacy when we come back. And we are back, segment number 5, and it is time for Fact or Fiction. This is something that Austin and I were talking about a little bit off the air, and obviously with Michigan State now back-to-back second weekends for Tom Izzo's group, we can now ask this question, and it's a question that has been asked before, and I know people have their opinions on it locally, but here we go. Fact or fiction? Tom Izzo is the best tournament coach of our lifetime. Okay, before I give an answer here, I do want to say straight up, it is more of an argument than people might think in favor of him. Okay? Here's what I look for when assessing how good a coach is in the tournament. Number one, Championships and Final Fours, do you have those? Okay. If you have more championships than anybody else, you're probably going to end up taking this position. At the same time, there are certain schools, I think Kansas is the prime example of this typically, where what matters obviously is whether or not you win. But you know at a school like a Duke or a Kentucky or a Kansas that they are going to have elite, top 1% talent in this sport. And one thing that I pay a lot of attention to when talking about coaches' legacies is not only how often are you making deep runs, but it's a detriment if you are flaming out often. And with Bill Self, you can point to a lot of upsets either early in the second weekend or late in the first weekend. 2010 to Northern Iowa. 2013 in the Sweet 16, they had a huge lead as a 1 seed over Michigan and coughed that up. They had the year where they had Embiid and Andrew Wiggins. I think one of them was injured in the tournament, but still they lost to, I think, an 11 seed. They were a 2-seeded team at the time. Since they won the national championship in 2022, they haven't made it to the second weekend. So that's stuff that's worth pointing out. I think that the biggest thing in favor of Izzo is the fact that he has won as a lower-seeded coach more than any coach in the history of this tournament. And that, so much of that is coaching. It's the ability to look at a matchup and say, okay, this is who we're playing, this is what we need to focus on, and whatever issues or problems have arisen in the past, we can find a way to mask those for 40 minutes. That is in favor of him. What isn't in favor of him is the fact that while he is an elite March coach, he is, and this is, look, somebody's got to be the world's, least rich billionaire, but he's a bad April coach, if that's an actual thing. The truth is, this is a guy who's not only won one national championship, but he's only ever made it to another. That means when he's gotten to that third weekend, which he has quite many times, like an obscene number of times, whether it is 99 or 01 or 05 or 2010 or 2015 or 2019, he gets to the Final Four, faces a team with superior talent, and loses. Whether it's a Duke or a North Carolina, take your pick. He's lost quite a few of those. So I'm going to say fiction on this. You want to put him top 5? Sure. I am somebody under the belief that, the real sign of an elite program is how often you're avoiding those flameouts. And the fact that this is a guy who has punched his ticket 28 consecutive times is truly astonishing. And that's the one thing, man, I am telling you, whoever Michigan State's next coach is, as brilliant as he may be, this isn't going to happen, okay? Unless we expand to 96, which I'm sure we will at some point, unfortunately. But in this current format, the fact that Michigan State's worst teams, quote-unquote, are objectively good teams is a testament to that consistency. But I can't call him the best March coach of our lifetime. I was born in 95, which is pretty much right around when he was hired. He's done unbelievable things there. Given the fact that we haven't had a Big Ten champion since 2000, I think you can easily say he's the best Big Ten March coach of our lifetimes. But with no national championship in 26 years and only one appearance in the national championship game, just can't quite go as far as to say best in our lifetime. But he's definitely in the top 3 to 5. All right, yeah, so that's my opinion. I'm sure other people have their opinions. Having been a guy who rooted for a program that went 20 years without a second weekend, it's annoying that we got to face off against them every year and they're always good. To have that consistency, the good old days continue. Maybe not as dominant or as great in March as you once were, but it is a remarkable achievement. So we'll be back with our gambling segment. That will be our final segment. And I want to put out a future on the Detroit Tigers because we have a brand new, quite a few new toys to play with. And one of them is Chris Fetter's new weapon in Framber Valdez. We'll talk about him and Cy Young odds. And then we will wrap up the show when we return. FanDuel, the tournament is here. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get up to $300 back in bonus bets every day for 10 days. Here's how it works. Place a tournament bet using the token, and if it doesn't win, you'll get up to $300 back in bonus bets every single day for 10 straight days. That's 10 chances to play all tournament long, from game props and money lines to spreads, totals, futures, and more. You can mix things up with same-game parlays for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to fill your bracket, FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the action day after day. So visit FanDuel.com/BigPlay to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/BigPlay to get in on the action. 21 plus select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus DC in Kentucky and Wyoming. Bonus bets are non-withdrawable and expire after 7 days. Tokens are received in increments of 1 per day. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat for Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org for Maryland. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY for New York, or call 1-877-770-7867 for Louisiana. And we are back, like I said, for our final segment here on Big Play Detroit. Tigers season kicks off this week against the San Diego Padres, and it is gambling future season where people look at the odds, they take out some futures on some players, and hopefully they can win some money back. And I wanted to focus on a Tiger here as we enter this season. And anytime I throw out some sort of gambling odds, I like to back them up with some sort of research or logic. And look, you have your format, you have your format. It works for people or not. But I wanted to just throw one out there because it's a guy who I thought looked excellent in spring, and I think there's some legitimate data to back up the fact that he maybe hasn't pitched the best baseball of his career yet. And that is now current Tiger, former Houston Astro, Framber Valdez, who is currently at plus 1,400 on the FanDuel Sportsbook to win the American League Cy Young. And it might sound crazy. Oh, my goodness, the Tigers having potentially 2 Cy Young winning pitchers on their team, and Tarek Skubal potentially having to take a backseat to Framber Valdez. And, well, I don't know if that'll ever be the case. Framber is more than capable, and there are numbers that indicate he could be due for a Cy Young caliber season. Hear me out. The number one thing with Framber is durability. Last 4 years, 31 starts, 28 starts, 31 starts. You know, we live in this age where if you have a guy that clocks 120 innings, it's considered a durable season. This is a guy who has maxed out at over 200 frames in a season. That does not include postseason action. Last year at 192 innings. Look, I think in this age where starting pitchers go 5 or 6 innings, we're reaching a point where guys that can go 190 plus is going to be more valued. Secondly, and this is the big thing, new park, new catchers. I know that there was a lot of attention brought to the fact that Framber had that mix-up frustration with Yainer Diaz a year ago where he gave up the home run on a pitch where he wanted one pitch and the catcher wanted another. But the fact is, that is a moment that will not happen this season in Detroit, not just because I think Framber's probably grown up and learned from the experience, but because of the fact that there are no Crawford boxes at Comerica Park. There's no short left field porch. This is a spacious park for a ground ball, fly ball pitcher, and that's not to say he doesn't have swing and miss stuff. We know that he does, but I think that with a bigger park, and you look at the peripherals, the fact that his FIP was a pretty solid amount lower than his ERA a year ago, I think that helps him out quite a bit. Secondly, and I saw Buster Olney did a whole piece on this, the Houston Astros, as good as they've been over the last decade or so, they did not have an elite group of defensive catchers last year. And I think when you look at a pitcher like Framber Valdez, he led the league in 2 categories last year. One was complete games with 2. The other one was wild pitches with 12. He actually led all of baseball in wild pitches. One thing that you can rely on for both Dylan Dingler and Jake Rogers, you're not going to get a lot of wild pitches. They are going to ask for those curveballs in the dirt. They're going to block those curveballs. And obviously, in an ideal world, you're going to get swing and miss. But I think that room for error that exists when you pitch at a smaller park or when you don't have elite catchers behind the dish, there's indicators that Framber's ERA could be a full run lower than it was a year ago. And you take a guy last year, 3.8 WAR, 3.66 ERA. I mean, this is kind of simplistic logic to use, but let's say it is a run lower this year. You're talking about a guy with 192 innings and a 2.66 ERA. That is someone who puts themselves right at the forefront of a potential Cy Young campaign. These are about futures, by the way. This is not, and it's about odds. This is not me saying Framber Valdez is winning the Cy Young. I can guarantee it. but so much of gambling is about playing the odds, and I think at plus 1,400 for a guy who has finished in the top 10 in Cy Young voting 3 of the last 4 years, going to a new team, got the new contract, I think he's going to be pretty relaxed. Great culture in Detroit, going to have something to prove. And you know what? With Skubal here, and we saw it a few times with Zach Greinke and Clayton Kershaw, right, back in the 2010s, sometimes it helps to maybe not be the guy. Skubal is the ace here. He's the homegrown dude. You have an opportunity for Frommer to really settle in, relax in Detroit. It is a 3-year deal, but I think there's a lot to look forward to here with Frommer Valdez. I think that he's poised to have a wonderful year. The last point I forgot to bring up is the fact that the guy looked phenomenal in spring. Record doesn't really matter. You don't pitch a ton of frames, but 0.98 ERA, 16 strikeouts, and here's what I love. Only 2 walks. He was commanding the ball. Whip just over 1, meaning he was getting a lot of ground ball outs too. Something to look forward to as we march on into Tigers season. We got a lot of written pieces coming for Roundtable. We got a lot of vlogs, videos coming regarding this team. You can pay attention to all those, and you can find those at Castellani2014 on Twitter, on TikTok as well, at Chris Castellani. And, of course, the content that Austin and I create can be found at CastellaniContent.com. But this particular show, you can find it on the Big Play Detroit YouTube channel. It is available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. It's available in audio form on Spotify. And it is streaming every single week on Twitter when it is streaming, because I know I've gotten some questions about this, and I understand it. I will make sure to alert my followers with a tweet or a retweet just to let you know that you can find it there. Follow Big Play Detroit on X as well. Austin, give us your plugs and we can get out of here.
Yep. I'm at Austin Sisler on X, at Austin Sisler _20 on Instagram. Got link trees in both bios, things with like portfolios. I've got a YouTube channel as well that includes some of the stuff that Chris and I do that don't make it onto his channel, things like video edits and things like that I just kind of archive there. If you're a business that's looking to potentially sponsor or advertise and you want to reach out to either Chris or myself, feel free to do that. And every Wednesday, I believe we drop at 11 p.m., Chris and Company, so be sure to check that out. We've had some really great interviews in the past with guys like Tarek Skubal, AJ Hinch, Kirby Joseph, some people in pop culture, things like that. So if you're interested in checking out Chris's interview show, definitely check that out on his YouTube channel.
Yep. One last amendment, and I don't mean to march over you too much, but you did say 11 p.m. for the airing of Chris and Company. It's actually 11 a.m. typically on Wednesdays. Not that big a deal, but if we got one comment about it, I'd be frustrated just for not bringing it up. So, Austin, thank you so much for being a part of this. And yes, so we've come together with ad packages and everything. If you guys are interested in sponsorships, do not be afraid to reach out. And we appreciate all the continued support as we continue to get this show off the ground. Thank you to the people at Big Play and everyone who continues to support us. We will be back next week with another show. Talk to you again real soon. Peace and happiness.